In this training session, we're going to look at actions in EventSentry. Actions allow you to forward events somewhere else. For example, with the default installation of EventSentry are email and database. So you see an important event, a service is stopped, disk space is low, a host is unavailable, etc., etc. You can trigger an email alert, of course. And at the same time, we want to consolidate our event logs somewhere in a database. So all the database is also an action. There are different type of actions because emails are very low volume and databases are very high volume. But nevertheless, they follow the same concept. We are sending the event from the event log from all of our agents somewhere else. Actions are visible in the management console under the actions container, of course. By default, we have two different email actions, one for heartbeat alerts, one for email, one for the default regular email alerts, and then we have the primary database. If you click on actions, you have a nice little overview again about all the configured actions. And with the plus icon, you can add a new action. This dialog, we're going to pause here for a little bit. This shows you all the different types of actions that are available in EventSentry. So when you add an action, you give it a name. And I'm going to use an example of a ticketing system. Right? You may have some sort of a system where you keep track of tickets, and maybe you want to create alerts or create tickets based on critical events, so you can keep track of them. So we'll just write ticketing system, whatever that may be. And let's go through the list of actions that are available. Database, of course, writes events to a SQL database. We support Postgres as well as Microsoft SQL Server. Process. EventSentry launches a process, so that can be a remediation, for example. You know that something occurs on occasion and you know how to resolve it with a script. Or it could be anything else you want to do with an event, whether that's maybe a custom integration with a ticketing system that's not supported via an HTTP action and so forth. Then, of course, we have the HTTP action. So that basically supports a variety of ways to interact with a website. Usually submitting a form or calling some sort of an API to then create a ticket. For example, you can interact with Trello and create a Trello card based on an event in the event log. Desktop is a way to display an event on the actual desktop. On the bottom right is a little pop-up. Jabber is sort of more of a legacy notification protocol that EventSentry also supports. If you have a Jabber server, you can configure it here, Jabber server and client, then you can use that. File is very simple, so that simply writes file events to a file, either in ASCII, HTML, or CSV format. Network sends a network message, not used much anymore, but it's similar to the net send command that you would do from the command line. Well, and talking about not used much anymore, there is the print action, which writes event log entries to a .matrix printer if you still have one of those. Then email, of course, sends emails based on alerts. Syslog. Syslog sends events from the event log to a remote syslog server. That can be a Linux server or anything else really that's running syslog, and EventSentry supports a variety of formats when it comes to syslog protocols. We can interact with many other syslog servers. SNMP, very similar. EventSentry sends event logs to a remote SNMP server as a trap. Servers are process, so that's a little bit different than the process from earlier. So the second action up here actually launches a process and captures potentially also captures the output, but the service process action here controls a service or kills or terminates a process. So let's say you have something happening that would require you to restart a service or terminate a process, then you would choose this. Shutdown, similar. You're shutting down the server based on an event, or reboot a server based on an event. Again, not something you'd use too much. And since we talked about legacy earlier, of course, if you still have a pager and have support for the SMPP protocol, then you can use the pager action. And sound, finally, is the ability to simply play a sound when a specific event happens. Of course, the agent where the event is being generated, we'll need a sound card and a speaker to actually play that sound file. And let's just go into one example here. HTTP action, for example. So once you hit OK, a dialog will open, and that dialog is specific to the action that you selected. So for the HTTP action, we have 3 different types of ways to use that action, either with a form submission, with a post put, or a GET request. And we also have templates here, right? So for example, let's say you wanted to integrate with a Telegram or Slack or Trello. You'll simply select this and basically just customize it based on your, with your API keys and things like that. We'll just leave this just for the record. And we can also add actions directly. You don't have to go through this proxy dialog. You can simply go to the pull down, say I want to do a process action. It's going to call it launch ABC. And here you have the ability to launch a process as an action. If you click the pull down menu here, you'll see that there's a number of actions, number of files already listed. So these files are built-in scripts that ship with EventSentry. So anything that has the @ symbol in front of it is essentially included in the EventSentry configuration. So if you select, for example, file size.vbs, then that script, and I'll illustrate where this can actually be found, is going to be launched, and it doesn't have to exist on the file system, where the agent is executing it. It doesn't matter. It's included in the configuration of EventSentry, and it's called a built-in script, basically. But you can, of course, also reference scripts on the file system. So for example, you could say C scripts abc.cmd, for example. And again, these scripts are always launched on the computer where the event occurs. So if you're expecting this to run on server 17, then you will have to make sure that the script abc.cmd actually exists on that server, on that remote server. If it's an embedded script, then it doesn't matter. So quick diversion here. If you go to script and managed, then we have a number of scripts here. And file size VBS, for example, is right here, included with the managed scripts. And if you double click it, you can view the contents of that script. And of course, you can also create your own scripts here. By default, we only have one script in there, which is the one that purges old data from the database. And as always, there's some options here. Do we log events when this action is called? And is there a max runtime? Do we show this on the desktop or not? And so forth. But as you can see, every action has its own dialog type here that cannot be changed. Once an action is created, you cannot change its type. You'd have to create a new action. So we have all this here. And there's some options that are available to any action type. One, for example, would be the schedule. So you can determine, when is this action actually active. If you deactivate it and the action and the event occurs during that time, then the action will simply not be triggered. There will be no events logged or anything like that. It will simply not run. And options, these options apply to most action types. So for example, here for the email actions, we can define triggers, a frequency, and whether we log the action activity to the database. Obviously, that's something that's not going to be available, for the actual database. In this particular case, we do have threshold options, but no other options available for the database action. Same thing for the process action right here. We have most information, most options available, but not all of them. And we have the use collector checkbox here as well. That's, again, available for some action types, the database, for email, for HTTP, but not for processes. So what that use collector checkbox means is that the action is normally triggered on the actual agent. So if the event happens on server 10, then that HTTP action or that process will be launched on server 10. Unless, of course, you hit the use collector checkbox, in which case it will be executed on the collector. So in this particular case, when the event happens on server 10 is not going to open up a HTTPS connection to the Trello.com website. Instead, the collector is going to do that. So that generally simplifies things quite a bit, because now you don't have to worry about, opening up certain connections on agents, for example. You just have to worry about opening up and allowing this on the actual server where the collector is running. And the same thing, of course, goes for email. Emails by default use the collector, so you don't have to worry about enabling SMTP access to all of your agents, only the collector. And you also notice that the heartbeat alert has the use collector disabled, simply because heartbeat alerts are usually critical, and we don't want to rely on the collector in case the collector itself is down. So that's why heartbeat alerts go directly to the SMTP server and not through the collector. So that's by design. And where are these actions being triggered? Well, this is something we're going to go into in another video, in another session. But essentially, in our event log packages, we have the ability to reference actions. For example, if you look at email notifications, email EventSentry errors, they'll go to an email. So this is one place where we can reference actions. And emails and so event log filters are actually the only place where we can reference any action type: email, process, HTTP, and so forth. However, in other package types, such as system health or security and compliance, we can only reference database actions. So for example, if you go into the inventory area here, where we collect hardware information, software information, and so forth, here we can specify the database. But that's the only database, that's the only action type that's actually allowed here. And it will, if you try to add another one, it will say there are no more database actions available, because email actions, HTTP actions, process actions, and so forth are not supported. That's pretty much how actions work in a nutshell. The documentation has more information on each action type. So if you're unsure about a specific setting, you can simply create the action and click the help button, or you can just search the documentation for that.